Well, good morning. Glad you've all joined us, wherever you join us online or right here in person. We're glad to have you here today. We're actually kicking off a brand new series called Grow Stuff, when we're going to be looking at, over the next few weeks, just the things that God uses in our life to grow our faith. And oftentimes we think about that and we think, oh, this is going to be about reading our Bible more, or he's going to tell us we need to pray more because we all know we need to do those things more, right? And we think about all those kind of things, but the reality is God uses lots of things to grow our faith, and oftentimes they're the things that we don't always value, things we don't always see or to appreciate or to understand. And so here's kind of the goal for the whole series, is just simply this thought that comes from the great author, unknown, because a lot of people have claimed this, but nobody knows who actually started it. But when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And my hope and my prayer is that over the next few weeks that the way we look at things, all of us, will change, so that in that process that we begin to change the way we think about God, about ourselves, and about others. And so I want you to write this down. We all face defining moments, right? And you think about them. Some of you have had defining moments financially. Some of you have had a bankruptcy, and that's a defining moment. I don't think anybody here has won the lottery, and if you have, keep your hand down. But if you did that, that'd be a defining moment, right? You know, maybe you've met the love of your life. There's a defining moment, right? All these different defining moments that come up along in life. You know, this has been the season of graduations, and in a sense, graduations are defining moments. How many of you finished high school this week? Give me a big shout. Really? Sammy? I thought at least we'd get one shout. Aren't you happy, Sammy? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing. Pedro's back there. Andrew's back there. Got some other guys. You know, if it was me, I'd shout. I mean, I don't care how tired it was. If I was done with school, woo, baby, right? Hey, Jake, you want to doc this for me, please? But you think about how those big defining moments, and they come along and they change our course, they change our direction, but they also can change the way we think and the way we feel. And so today we're going to look at one of those moments, those defining moments in the life of not the person we always think about if you've ever read this story. Because in this moment, a number of people have defining moments, which is kind of how it works for a lot of us, isn't it? We all think it's my defining moment, when in reality it's a defining moment for lots of people. And lots of different ways it happens. So before we jump into the story today, I invite you to bow your heads, and let's pray one more time together, okay? Lord, for some of us, today, even this moment, could be a defining moment. For some of us, we're here today for the very first time. And maybe it's our first time ever being in any church, or maybe it's our first time back in church after a long time. For some of us, we're new to this area, and so this is the first time being in this space. For some of us, we've been coming week after week for as long as we can remember, but even for us, there's that chance that this could be a defining moment. And Father, I'm thankful for that life is filled with lots of little moments. We're never aware when exactly one will be a defining one, but you are always, always, always trying to bring those moments to our life and to our understanding. To see it in the things around us, the trees, and hear the birds. To see it in the faces around us. And even to sense it in the space around us. And so today, for those of us that you've designed for this to be a defining moment, I pray that we won't miss that. And for the rest of us who this is just another moment in life, I pray you just help to use that. And that we, Jesus, we look at this story from your life, that it maybe give us pause to think about how maybe, just maybe, we need to see some things different ways. So we give you this time. We give you this space to do whatever you need to do now in your name. Amen. If you want to follow along, we're going to be over John chapter 9. In fact, it's the whole chapter that describes this event. It's unusual because if you're familiar with the stories of Jesus' life, this part of the Bible we call the Gospels, most stories are fairly short. You know, Jesus sees somebody, heals somebody, gets on. Jesus teaches this, does that, gets on. This is one of those times that just goes on and on. I mean, this goes on. In fact, it goes on beyond what we're going to finish today. You ought to go home and read it this afternoon and read the rest of it because he expands in it. But here's the story. As Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. So Jesus and the guys are traveling someplace. They come along. Here's this guy that's blind from birth. I'm not sure how they knew exactly when they saw him, whether it's something they learned later or what. But here's this guy blind. He's probably begging. He's probably calling out because you've all seen people like that this is not a new phenomenon. When somebody has some ailments and can't get along, they'll beg, they'll ask for help. And that was a very big tradition back then. And so they see this man, and his disciples asked him an important question. They said, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Have you ever read that and thought, what in the world are these guys talking about? I mean, I can stand saying, what did his parents do wrong? Because something that doesn't work out right with our kids, they're born with something that's less than, some kind of ailment, some kind of hampering thing. We try to have an explanation for it. And I've been around people who have had kids or have been the product of those things, of their parents being on drugs or drinking when they were pregnant. Now they have this fetal alcohol syndrome and it affects them the rest of life. I understand that whole complication, and you do too. But why in the world would they ask if it was the guy's fault? I mean, I read that and I think, really, guys? I mean, I understand, is this his parents' fault? Or does this sort of just happen? But to say, Jesus, who sinned? This guy or his parents seems kind of crazy, doesn't it? I mean, we all try to make sense out of stuff, and I think every age has these ideas of what happens, you know. A lot of the stuff you read from the Bible, and you get this idea, they had this idea that if you obey God, God will bless you and everything will go great. And if you mess up with God, God's going to get you, right? And it all seeps into a life. And when there's sort of this understanding, you know, they're blessed because something really good happens. Like we say those words, he's blessed, she's blessed. Something goes bad, we think, what did you do to deserve something bad happening in your life, right? And of course, we have this great modern cliche, everything happens for a reason, right? Which is one of the stupidest statements you could ever make, right? Because of course, everything happens for a reason. You get in a car accident, it happened for a reason. Somebody ran the light, right? That's the reason. You know, you and your girlfriend are messing around, it gets a little too far, you get one past the goalie, all of a sudden she's pregnant. Everything happens for a reason. There's a whole bunch of reasons in a lot of these things, right? But all of us have these kind of pieces that go on. This apparently was their thing. Who sinned, him or his parents? To which I love how Jesus answers. Very first word he says, neither. Come on, guys, really? Neither. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, all right? Neither of them, especially the guy, did not sin in this. Then he says something interesting that has perplexed people. But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. That's a woo-woo. I'm glad it was a woo-woo for you, Susan. That's good. But you can read that and say, oh, so did God make him blind so that sometime years later, 15 years, 20 years, 40 years, 50 years, we don't know how old this guy is, that Jesus could show up and fix it. Is that what he's talking about here? Or is there a deeper point? Just because God can use what happens doesn't mean he causes what happens. But thankfully, he can use what happens. And so Jesus says, hey guys, it was neither of them. But something's going to happen here today. In fact, he will go on and talk about this idea of working when it's light. It's kind of a crazy thing, but let's catch back up in the story. And so Jesus spits on the ground, a little dirt there, makes a little dirt, a little mud, puts it on the guy's eyes, and he tells him, go now. Go and wash in the pool of Siloam. So the blind guy, he goes. And I love how quick this is. He goes, he washes, and he comes home seeing. A lot of great details in there, right? It sounds like a guy talking, right? This is not a woman taking these notes. He goes, He comes home seeing, which you can only imagine what kind of scene that is, right? Can you imagine having a child? Let's just use the age of 30 just because it's a good number. 30 years old, your son's coming home for the very first time, and he can see. I mean, he knows the path by heart because he's been making it for all these years, but now he's going, whoa, right? I mean, he's seeing his hands. He's seeing people's faces for the first time. He's walking along, and it's got to be going through his mind. I mean, this is going to be unbelievable. See my parents for the very first time. I mean, you expect there's going to be a huge celebration. There's going to be a party. There may even be cake, right? So he says he comes home. And his neighbors and some who had seen him formerly begging, because everybody sees the baker because they're just a regular thing, they all ask this question. Isn't that him? Is that the guy that's always been in that? Isn't that him? And so some of them say that he was. Others say, no, it just looks like him. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. To which he's thinking, hey, I'm here, right? In fact, as John records, so he says, listen, he insists, I am the man. It's me. It really is me. You know, I'm expecting, it's a big celebration, right? Hey, look, I can see you. I've heard your voice now. You don't look anything like your voice, but hey, it's great to see you. To which they say, the thing that all of us always say, how'd this happen? Because isn't that the question you always have when something good happens to somebody? They get the promotion, and you didn't get the promotion. Your first question is not, oh, great, how'd you make it work, right? Somebody gets a brand new car, you're all, ooh, they're showing it off. You're like, this is sweet. Tell me how you did it, right? Because I know how much you make. This is really, we always ask the how question. They've missed the whole, he's excited about what's happened, and they're like, how did this happen? So he goes, listen, okay, here's how it works. This man they call Jesus made some mud and put it in my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, and so I went and washed, and then I could see. Big deal. Woohoo, celebration, maybe even just a couple balloons would be nice, right? To which they ask, so where's he at? Which I love his response. In fact, you will hear this response over and over from this guy. Say these three words. I don't know. Why would I know? I can, he put this mud on me. He tells me to walk to this place. I wash it off. I can see for the first time. My first thought is, go home and see my parents, who I've never seen in my life. I don't know where he's at. So, they bring him to the Pharisees. Because that's the thing you do. They're trying to figure this out. This is a miracle. This is unbelievable. Nobody's heard of this happening. So let's take him to the religious people who ought to be able to make some sense out of this. And if we were reading along at this moment, you would hear that music, that mood music. Because John inserts something that isn't said in here, but comes through. It says, oh, by the way, this would be that voiceover in the movie. Now, the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Dun, dun, dun. Sets the whole stage, because now, there's going to be a conflict. So now the Pharisees ask the man, how did you get your sight? They're not overwhelmed. They don't see this beggar guy that they've been helping out occasionally. It's like, what? How did you get your sight? So he says, well, he put mud in my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. Again, a very short story. Mud in my eyes, washed, now I see. Church, I love the response. So some of the Pharisees said, no. This man does not keep the Sabbath day, so he is not from God. Doesn't keep the Sabbath, not from God. In fact, they probably quoted an Old Testament passage that some of you may be familiar with. To the law and to the testimonies, if they speak not according to it, there is, just seeing how many of you know this passage, there are no light in them, right? That's where they would have gone, right? Doesn't keep the Sabbath? Don't have to pay attention to the guy. This guy is wrong. He's not from God. We've already got it settled. We don't have to even think about this. I don't care if this is the first time you've ever seen, which is a little weird, but I don't even have to deal with that, because here's the wall. Here's the section. We know what God would and wouldn't do. We know what God can and cannot do. And since we know what he wouldn't and couldn't do, he wouldn't and he couldn't and he didn't, and stop it. Just stop it. But others in the group say, well, how can a man who's a sinner do miracles and signs like these? Because even though they know he's broken the Sabbath, because apparently he made something, he spit and made some mud that was working, they're a little perplexed. How could this be possible? And so you can understand there's this argument that develops. In fact, John says they couldn't agree with each other. There's this division among them. Some saying, oh, no, we don't even have to think about it. He's wrong. He can't be here. The others saying, well, hold it here. How do you explain it then? I don't have to explain it because I know what he can't and can't do. He wouldn't, can't, won't. So finally, after a while of discussion, they turn to the guy who has to have been just like, what am I even doing here, right? I want to go home and see, I want to see the puppy I've been playing with for years, which is now a dog, and I don't even know what it looks like. I know what it feels like. I want to go out. I want to see more stuff. I got home. I thought there'd be a celebration, maybe some cake, somebody would be, ooh, little balloons, but no, they drug me here. Now I'm sitting here while you guys argue. So finally they turn to him and say, what do you say, since it's your eyes that were open? Which kind of makes sense. What is your story? How do you see this thing? To which he says, he's a prophet. Which is a weird statement to make, because typically we think of a prophet as someone who speaks stuff, foretells stuff, speaks for God. But in their context, in Judaism, there was this idea that prophets were more than that, and there was always a hope of this voice of God would come and be with their nation and guide them and speak to them. So the Pharisees hear this, and they don't believe that he had been born blind and could now see again. So they did what any reasonable group would do. They called his parents, which you have to love if you were like 30 or 40 years old, right? You're like, really? Parents? I don't want my parents, No, but they don't believe him. They don't believe he was born blind. And then he's gotten his sight, even though everybody else has said that's why he's been brought here. And so they asked them, his parents, is this your son who you say was born blind? And if you say that, then how did this happen? Now, can you imagine where they're at? They've only had a few minutes to process this. You're home, you hear some noise outside, you hear somebody yelling and screaming, you hear neighbors talking, you hear this sort of arguments, yes, he is, no, he isn't going on out there. You step outside, you see somebody. He sees you for the first. Whoa, you're crazy. You just, well, here it is, and then off they take him to the Pharisees. Now you're drug in there, and now they're asking you all these questions. You're not even sure how this all goes. And so his parents answer him. We know that this is our son, and we know he's born blind. We were there. We've watched him his whole life. But we don't know how he can now see, because maybe they haven't heard the whole story. We don't know who opened his eyes, which, by the way, we are thrilled with, because now he can get a real job. He won't have to be begging anymore. Maybe he'll get out of our basement, right? But you need to ask him. He is old enough to speak for himself, which seems kind of weird. Why would his parents say that? And then John tells us that, by the way, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, because they held this thing over people. They had decided that anybody that said anything about Jesus, you're out of here. We're not putting up with this foolishness. You're kicked out of the synagogue, which for them was kicked out of the community. You know, your businesses would suffer. Your relationships would suffer. People couldn't talk to you, couldn't associate with you. It was a way to get cut off from the community, and nobody wanted that. So they took the smart road. We don't know. We don't know what happened. He is son. He was born blind. You need to ask him. Then John tells us something interesting. He says they called the man back in for the second time, which tells us that when his parents showed up, they said, go out, stand outside. It's like those days being back in the principal's office, right? Or parent-teacher conference, you're there, and then you got to leave the room. You're thinking, oh, no, they're not going to, my teacher's going to say about this or that. And you come back in the room. So they call him in a second time. And they say to him simply this: you should give God the glory by telling the truth, because we know that this man is a sinner. Give it up. Quit playing this game. Quit acting like you've been born blind. Quit acting like he healed you. Change your story. Get it straight. Give it up. And he answers, listen, I don't know. I don't know if he's a sinner. Not my worry and not my problem. Wasn't what I was concerned about. I mean, he's the one that saw me, came up to me, put the mud on my eyes, sent me away. I washed, I come back, I can see. I don't know who he is. That wasn't my whole point. One thing I do know, I was blind, and now I can see. I can't explain the rest of it to you. And have you ever been in one of those situations where you can't explain the situation? It is unexplainable, but it's also undeniable. You can't explain it. I don't know how this happened. You can call it a miracle. You can call it a coincidence. You can call it whatever it is. I just know I can't explain it, but it's undeniable that this is what happened. And because it's undeniable, I have to deal with the unexplainable as much as you guys don't want to deal with it. But I can't tell you about him being a sinner. I can't tell you about how all this worked, why the mud worked, why washing worked, why that was all part of the process. All I can tell you, I couldn't see this morning, and lo and behold, I can see your faces, and they don't look very happy this moment. So then, they ask him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? To which he gives the honest response that you and I would. I've already told you, right? I've already told you, and you didn't listen. So why would you want to hear it again? Maybe you hear it because you want to become his followers and disciples too. Yeah, you know how this is going to go, right? You can just tell from the language, this is not going to go well. And you're exactly right, because here's what they say. You are his follower, his disciple, but we are Moses' followers and disciples. Get this straight. We're with Moses. And we know that God spoke to Moses. We got lots of records of that. We have stories of that. But we don't even know where this man comes from. To which now, this guy who can actually see for the first time feeling pretty good because he can actually see now. And life has changed for him, which gives him a boldness that we're not expecting. And he says, well, guys, that's astonishing. It's astonishing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. And you guys are supposed to be the religious guys. You guys are supposed to know all this stuff. You're supposed to understand all this stuff. It's kind of astounding me. You don't know where he's from. I mean, listen, guys, I want to do a little theology because I'm not great in it, but at least I got an idea. We all know that God does not listen to sinners, but he listens to anyone who worships, that is devout, and obeys him. I mean, that's what you guys have been teaching me. That's what we all understand and all believe. Nobody has ever heard of anyone giving sight to a man born blind. And if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. The temptation for me at this moment is to expand on that and apply it to a larger context than where we're sitting today. Some of you have no clue what I'm talking about. The other ones do understand where I'm going with that. Because sometimes God does stuff that is unexplainable. Sometimes God even does stuff that doesn't fit inside the four corners of our understanding of him. And sometimes God does that simply because he can, and he does, and he's want to. And as your dad probably told you sometime, I get to because your dad would say, I'm your dad, but here, God says, I'm God. Which gives us some pause that when we see somebody doing something that seems good and we right away say, no, they can't be doing good because they don't fit our box, we have to ask ourselves the question, what's wrong here? Because they're clearly doing it. Who's wrong in this whole thing? But you know the guys aren't going to give up without a fight, right? So he's given them some theology. He's been astonished at how feeble they are, how ununderstanding they are, how they've got this little picture of God and got God all figured out. So this is what they say back to him. You were born full of sin. Because, by the way, you were born blind, so either your parents or you messed up, because that's what everybody believes, right? But you were born full of sin. Are you trying to teach us? And the answer is, yeah. I mean, he wasn't trying to, but he was trying to, because they were clearly not getting it at all. They had it figured out. They knew what God would and wouldn't do, what God could and couldn't do, and because God wouldn't and couldn't, he can't and won't, and that's where they're at. They can't even imagine anything else. So yeah, he's doing a little teaching. And so they throw him out of the synagogue, which really sucks for him, because for the first time he can see, I mean, for the first time he can look around the synagogue and say, hey, baby, I'm single. I got a real job now, right? I don't have to beg anymore. I can see you. Ooh, baby, you look good. I mean, he can, all that stuff, that's out. But I wonder how much being out at that moment bothered him. And I love the picture that John paints, because he captures another part that's going on. And he says, oh, wait, before we get there, love the C.S. Lewis quote. What you see depends a great deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. Think about that in the context of this room, where the guy born blind can now see. And where these religious leaders, the people that should have it figured out, and where they stand out and how they see things. That what you see depends a great deal on where you're standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. So John tells us that when Jesus heard that, when he hears that the guy's been thrown out of the synagogue, where all this stuff is taking place, he finds him and he says to him, do you believe that is trust in the Son of Man? Which is an interesting thing to say to a guy that's got his sight for the first time and had all this stuff. You'd think he'd say, hey, I'm so sorry this happened to you. By the way, how do you like that looking? How are the eyes working for you? Everything is great, But no, it's just simply, do you believe, do you trust? Because this is that idea. In your Bible, anytime in the New Testament, when you read the word believe, it actually has three meanings that are always there. It has the meaning of trust, and has the meaning of have faith in. See, in our language, we believe lots of stuff. Some of you believe in unicorns, right? Some of you believe in rainbows and pots of gold at the end. Some of you believe you're going to strike it rich one day, that you're going to be a famous movie star, that you're going to play in the NBA or the NFL or the baseball or soccer or whatever thing. And for some of you, that belief is a trust and it pushes you. But for a lot of us, it's just simply a belief. But every time you read your Bible in the New Testament, when you see that word believe, it also means this idea of trust and having faith in that thing. And so when Jesus asks this, he's not just saying, do you believe in this? But this is a deeper thing. Is this a belief that you put your weight on? And so the guy says back to him, who is he, sir? Who is he so that I can believe, that I can trust in him? Because I know your voice. Because your voice is the one that talked to me a few hours ago. Your voice is the one that said, now go and wash yourself. Your voice is the one that I heard telling your followers that I didn't get in this situation because my parents messed up, and I didn't get in this situation because I messed up, and because I know your voice. And I know the power behind that voice. Point him out, baby. Because I trust you, because I know what you can do, so I'm willing to trust you for whatever direction you give me. See, God often uses moments in our lives to initiate faith. For some of you, it's been an answered prayer. A big answered prayer, something you've prayed about and hoped for and longed for, and it took place, and you know because of the way it took place, there's no other explanation than that God stepped in It initiated that moment. For those of you, it's been something that somebody said at just the right time, and it's a weird thing because it's somebody you wouldn't normally expect them to say like something like that, but it stuck. Because it stuck, it was a moment for you. And for this guy, Jesus has initiated and used a moment to initiate faith. But here's the other piece you need to understand. Those moments were never designed to be the foundation of our faith. Those are moments to get us moving in the faith direction, but they're never to be the foundation, the basis of it. If we're always believing that we're going to get a miracle on everything, that becomes a very fragile faith. And Jesus doesn't want us to have a fragile faith, but he does want us to have faith. So he'll give us those moments to move us, to get us leaning in that direction, and when he gets us leaning in that direction, he'll oftentimes step in through another means. There's something to give us a stronger and firmer foundation. That's exactly what he's doing with this guy. He's telling him, hey, do you believe, do you trust? You're going to put your full weight on the Son of Man. And he says, hey, baby, you've done so well. I'm ready to take that next step. And here's the thing. You may want to write this down. The catalyst of our faith can't stay the basis of our faith. And that's what Jesus is exemplifying here. The catalyst of our faith, you notice the we is crossed out because in your notes, whoever put those together, put a wrong word in there. That's why that's crossed out there. The catalyst of our faith can't stay the basis of our faith. We have to move on. Our faith has to grow from wherever it begins. It's great that it begins, and sometimes it's powerful how it begins, but it can't just stay there. It can't always just be that. It's got to go deeper. And it's got to get us to a place that it's not just about the things that have got us there, but about the person who's behind the things that got us there. So Jesus says to him, ta-da! You have seen him, which carries a whole lot more weight when you think about he only has seen him because a few hours ago he couldn't see anybody, but now you've seen him because, hey, it's me. Which I love that reveal, right? Because the guy's open. The guy knows Jesus' voice. He's heard it. He's moved. But now Jesus says, hey, and then, hey, I'm it. And I love the guy's response. He simply says, Lord, I believe. I trust. In fact, John will say he will literally fall down on the ground at this moment. Fall down in worship. Fall down in respect. Fall down in understanding that the thing that's happened in his life happened not just because of him following some directions, not just because of that moment, but things happened in his life because there's somebody greater out there. And I don't know where you're at on this particular moment and this morning, but I do know that for some of you, you need to know that there is somebody greater. That there's somebody behind those things, those blessings. There's somebody behind those moments. There's somebody that wants you to put full trust in him. Knowing that right now, it can be kind of tough, and because it's tough, it makes it harder to do that. And there's a reason for that. And you know what the reason is? You got to come back next week and find out, all right? Because next week we're going to talk about that. Hey, folks, thanks for coming out today. Jerry, you want to come up and tell us how we wind things down? Hope you come back next week as we continue this.